Hi, my name is Michael Sahno. I'm Jewish and I love Israel. So if you love Israel, if you love being Jewish, or if you have an unwavering connection to the land of Israel, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the 12 Cities in Israel podcast. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Hey, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? My name is Michael Sahno, and welcome to the 12 Cities in Israel podcast, the only positive podcast about the history, the food, the culture, and the people of Israel. I got that kind of backwards. Normally I do history last, but hey, what you gonna do? Listen, if this is your first time watching, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell. If you want to take us with you, you can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and on Spotify. This episode, as my viewers who have been watching know, has been brought to you by the 12 Cities in Israel Modern Hebrew Flashcards. The best way to learn or to brush up on Hebrew. They are available on Amazon for Kindle. If you don't have Kindle, check down in the description. You can download it to your Android, iPhone, desktop, Mac, or iPad. It's available on all those platforms. So go over there and check it out. Hey, I went to Miami, so I'm back from Miami, and I was gone for a week, but I took about 2 weeks off. And while I did, well, we kind of had a war. I'm going to be covering that in one of the upcoming episodes. I want to get through the 12 Cities in Israel first series, where I tell you all about the 12 cities in Israel, the 12 cities that I've chosen as the super duper major places to visit and places that carry the most history. But I will be going over that. So I apologize if I'm not bringing it to you right now. But I will. So with that, let's roll into our next city. I'm going to give you the history on it. And it is, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see behind me, it is Yaffo, otherwise known as Jaffa. But in Hebrew, it is known as Yaffo. So I will be referring to it, since I speak a smattering of Hebrew. I will be referring to it throughout the episode as Yaffo. So let's get right into it. So Yaffo is the southern, one of the oldest ports in Tel Aviv. It is an ancient port city in Israel, and it's famous for its association with the biblical stories of Jonah, Solomon, and as well as the mythological story of Andromeda and Perseus. So it's a magical Mediterranean port city that has seen the footprints of every major and minor empire in the region. It's amazing. It's a fascinating city. It's a beautiful city. And when I wrote magical Mediterranean city, and I mean it, when you go there, when you see it, and you see the rocks of Andromeda, and you walk along those stone staircases on those winding, they're not alleys, they're the actual like roadways-ish. But it's fabulous, it's amazing, and it is such a vibrant city with an amazing history. So let's shoot into that right now. So ancient Yaffo was built in the Middle Bronze Age, on a 130-foot tell, which was created through the accumulation of debris and landfill over the centuries. It was set on a high ridge with a broad view of the coastline. And this position specifically gave the ancient site a distinct advantage that allowed Yaffo to remain an important strategic port throughout its history. The Yaffo that we know from antiquity, it was established at the latest in around 1800 BCE, before the Common Era. Now, the city of Yaffo is mentioned in an Egyptian letter from 1440 BCE. And this letter retells the story of the taking of Jaffa, which is the Greek name for the city, and glorifies its conquest by the pharaoh Thutmose III, whose general, and I'm gonna slaughter this one, Jehutni, hid Egyptian soldiers in sacks carried by pack animals and sent them camouflaged as a tribute into the Canaanite city. Trojan horse, anyone? Come on. Now, these hidden soldiers then emerged and surprised the Canaanites holding the city, and then the Egyptian soldiers took Yaffo or Joppa as their own. Now, going back to the Trojan horse, this story predates the tale of the Trojan horse as told by Homer by at least 200 centuries. By at least 2 centuries, so 200 years, sorry. So wait a minute, I'm sensing a little bit of, I'm going to use the word plagiarism in the ancient world. I'm sorry, Homer, but that's not your jam. That's not your story. It is the story of the Egyptians taking Yaffo from the Canaanites. So Yaffo is also mentioned in the Amarna letters under its Egyptian name Yaffo. The city remained under Egyptian rule until approximately 800 BCE. So from this, I mean, we're talking about pharaohs. We're talking about way back in the day. So Yaffo goes way back. So you have an opportunity when you go there to actually be walking on the same ground as people who had been there 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. It's absolutely phenomenal. Now, Yaffo is mentioned 4 times in the Bible. First, as a city opposite the territory given to the Hebrew tribe of Dan in Joshua 1946, then as a port of entry for the cedars of Lebanon for Solomon's temple in 2 Chronicles 2:16. It is the place where the prophet Jonah embarked for Tarshish in Jonah 1:3, and then finally as part of the cedars of Lebanon to come into the land for the second temple of Jerusalem in Ezra 3:7. So it has a lot of biblical importance. I'm going to take a sip of coffee. Peter, this is for you. J-Hats as well. Those are my 2 Patreon subscribers. If you want to go over there, hit it up. It's in the beginning, and it's also in the notes below. So give me one moment. Awesome Jacob's coffee. So Yaffo is mentioned in the book of Joshua as the territorial border of the tribe of Dan, and it is where the modern term Gush Dan, did not know this at all, for the center of the coastal plain comes from. The tribe of Dan did not manage to remove the Philistines from Yaffo, though, but many descendants of Dan lived along the coast and earned their living from shipbuilding, the sea trade, and from fishing. Now, in the Song of Dvorah, in Judges 5, Dvorah, the 4th judge of pre-monastic Israel, big words there, asks, and Dan, why did he linger by the ships? So here we go. We've got some... I like to think of it as historical evidence because I think of the Torah, the Bible, as just the history of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. But there you go. And eventually, after years of Canaanite and Philistine, control of Yaffo, King David and his son, King Solomon, captured the city and used its port to bring in the cedars used during the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem, in Jerusalem. Now, this sovereignty, though, didn't last. And after the death of Solomon, Yaffo returned back to Philistine control. Why do we know this? Because in the late 8th century BCE, the Neo-Assyrian emperor Sennacherib did I say that right? I hope so, is recorded as having conquered Yaffo from the Philistine king of Ashkelon, which I went over in our Ashkelon episode. Go back, check some of these out. It's really some amazing history. You can really see a lot of how Israel developed over time, and it's fascinating. I hope you enjoy these histories as much as I enjoy researching them and bringing them to you. So now we have the Neo-Assyrians. Excuse me. So the occupation of Yaffo by the Neo-Assyrian king Sennacherib, which occurred during the reign of King Hezekiah in 701 BCE, was later interrupted by a period of Babylonian occupation. They're always there. What, those guys? Now, while under the rule of the Persians, Yaffo was governed by the Phoenicians on their behalf. So we know the Phoenicians were up in Syria. The Tyrians, I'm pretty sure, might have that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that's what it is. So they ruled, the Persians ruled Yaffo from Tyre, the Phoenician Empire. So but that came to an end because of the Hellenistic period. And this is where it gets kind of public consciousy. So Yaffo has become a prominent location in Greek mythology with the tale of Perseus, Clash of the Titans, anyone. In it, he is supposed to have saved Andromeda from the sea monster Cetus by slaying it either by ramming a sword into its back or by turning it into stone with the head of the Gorgon Medusa. Remember that? Woo! The first one. Remember the stop action? It was awesome with the skeletons and everything. Sorry, I'm reliving my childhood right now. Now, Andromeda's rock can still be seen sitting in Yaffo's harbor. Interestingly, scholars have noted that the Cetus is similar to the biblical sea monster in the book of Jonah. There are even references as to whether or not this mythological whale, because that's where that is the what is it? Would it be anthropological, historical? I don't know. Some guy. What would that guy's title be? But basically, he or she or a group of people came to the assumption that the Cetus, this great sea monster, was that in Greek and biblical narratives was a whale, which is interesting because we have the Jonah swallowed by a whale thing. Anyways, it is doubtful, though, that sea monsters were what Alexander the Great's troops worried about when his armies held Yaffo during his conquests towards the east. It was wrested by Alexander from the Phoenicians sometime around 332 BCE, and then later became a port city of the Seleucid Empire when Alexander's generals fought for the scraps of his empire following his death. It remained under Seleucid control until the Maccabean Revolt, which took place from 167 to 160 BCE, and thus came under the control of the Hasmonean dynasty. Now, Yaffo was then captured and razed later on during the First Jewish-Roman War, because after the Hasmoneans, the Romans came in, which took place from 66 to 73 CE by the Roman general Cestius Gallus. The Jewish historian Josephus, in his book Jewish War, wrote that 8,400 of Yaffo's inhabitants died during Gallus's massacre of the city. Later, pirates who had moved into the ruined city and were operating from the rebuilt port incurred the wrath of Vespasian, who was then a general, not yet the emperor. After routing the pirates, he again razed the city and erected a citadel with the Roman garrison in its place. According to Josephus, however, the harbor of Yaffo was inferior to that of Caesarea, and is most likely the reason that pirates were able to get away with using it in the first place. Just in case you wanted to know. I've got the info. So in the first millennium, Yaffo was a seat of rabbinic scholarship, with a number of Jewish scholars making mention of or visiting the city. Their accounts can be found in a number of rabbinic texts, such as the Midrash, the Jerusalem Talmud, and the Babylonian Talmud, and also in the Pesikta Rabbati, which is a Jewish mythological text. I don't even know if that's a word. Sort of like, it's a book of Jewish mysticism. It's an amazing read, and it has some really amazing insights into not only the thought, but religiously into Judaism itself. So several streets and alleys found in what is now the Yaffo flea market are in that area are named after these renowned Jewish scholars. How cool is that? And with regard to the early first centuries of Christianity, which also had a place in the area at the time, Yaffo was relatively unimportant to the Romans and to the Byzantines. But in the 5th century CE, so that's that's 500 years later, it was named as a bishopric or a diocese, with only a small number of Greek or Latin bishops known to historians. So it was noted for being under the control of, what's it called, the Holy See, I think. But it wasn't so prominent that it had a role maybe on the councils. Like, I know that Ashkelon had a big role. All right, so in 636, Yaffo was conquered during what was the Rashidun Caliphate's 25-year period of military expansion following the death of Muhammad. And this expansion led to the expulsion of the Byzantine Empire from the Levant, and Yaffo remained under the control of the Rashidun Empire until the establishment of the Umayyad Empire, which was a rival faction. Under the new caliphate, it served as a port for the inland city of Ramla, which is about 6 miles away, and the Umayyad provincial capital of the region at the time. So Ramla was, for the Umayyads, I found out during this that Ramla was built by the Umayyads in that time. So it's not one of the more ancient cities. But still an important city. So this all changed, though, in June of 1099 with the capture of Yaffo during the First Crusade. And the Crusaders then made the city the seat of the county of Jaffa and Ascalon. Now, I'm saying Jaffa and Ascalon because that is the naming that they used. So the Crusaders then made the city the seat of the county of Jaffa and Ascalon in the newly established kingdom of Jerusalem. Yaffo would change hands again in 1187 when it was conquered by Saladin, and yet again on September the 10th, 1191. What a horrible place to live at during this time, right? When the city surrendered to King Richard the Lionheart 3 days after the Battle of Arsuf. Saladin attempted to reoccupy the city in the Battle of Jaffa in July of 1192, but the city remained in the hands of the Crusaders. On September 2nd, 1192, the Treaty of Jaffa was formally signed, and thus began a 3-year truce between the two armies, which is interesting because these guys both wanted each other's heads. Now, decades later, Frederick II fortified the castle of Jaffa and had 2 inscriptions carved into the city wall, one Latin and the other Arabic. The inscription was deciphered in 2011. Why it took so long, I don't know why. And it describes him as the Holy Roman Emperor and bears the date 1229. Bum, bum, bum. So let me just take another sip of coffee at the end of the Crusades. Do you think that they did that? No, there was no coffee then, right? Darn. How did they live? All right, there you go. I'm repowered. So eventually the Crusaders were driven from the Holy Land by the Mamluks. And in 1268, Jaffa was conquered by an army led by the fourth Sultan of Egypt in the Mamluk Bahri dynasty named Baibars. Now, over the next few centuries, Jaffa remained a small fortified port town on the Mediterranean, and it was a hub for commerce and a frequent destination for pilgrims and visitors to the region. Now, this brings us, of course, to the Ottoman period. And with the expansion of the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Selim I, Jaffa was conquered in 1515. So we had a couple of centuries that passed between the Mamluks to the Ottoman times. And it seems as if Jaffa just kind of went with the flow of whoever was in the area. Now, in the Ottoman census of 1596, Jaffa was bureaucratically placed in the sub-district of Ramla within the regional district of Gaza. It had a population of 15 households, all of which reported to be Muslim, and they paid a fixed rate of 33.3% on various trade products. So you'll be able to tell your friends at your next dinner party that, hey, did you know that under Ottoman rule in the 1500s that Jaffa, residents of Jaffa paid 33.3% on all their trade products? You will, because you heard it here. Tons of useless information, but it's interesting. So, all right, so botanist and travel writer Leonard Rauwolf landed near Jaffa in September of 1575, and he wrote, "We landed on the high rocky shore where the town of Joppa did stand formerly. At this time, the town was so demolished that there was not one house to be found." And when the travel writer John Kotvik or Kotovictus visited Jaffa in 1598, he described it as a heap of ruins. Wow, put that on the travel brochure. That is not a pleasant description. Now, the dilapidated, that was fun, and ruined state of the city changed in the 17th century with the reestablishment of churches and hostels for Christian pilgrims en route to Jerusalem and the Kinneret, or the Galilee. And during the 18th century, the coastline around Jaffa was often besieged, as it had been in the past, by pirates, and this led to the inhabitants relocating inland to Ramle and to Lod. Now, while away, the city's former residents relied on messages from a solitary guardhouse at the port to inform them when ships were approaching the harbor. Imagine being that guy. It's like living in a lighthouse. This difficulty with parrots. I just imagine all these parrots with cutlasses and stuff. Now, sorry. This difficulty with pirates was only the beginning, though, because the landing of goods and passengers was notoriously difficult and dangerous in the waters off of Jaffa's port, and until well into the 20th century, ships were forced to rely on teams of oarsmen to bring their cargo ashore. Wow. So on the 7th of March, 1799, Napoleon, during his campaign in the Middle East, captured the town in what was called the Siege of Jaffa. Now, during which his forces ransacked the city and killed scores of local inhabitants as a reaction to his envoys being murdered as they delivered his ultimatum of surrender to the residents and forces in Jaffa. So, in another brutal act of revenge, Napoleon ordered the massacre of thousands of Muslim soldiers who were imprisoned after having surrendered to the French. So, Napoleon was kind of a jerk. Bottom line, easy. Which is interesting because there are like these little icons of Napoleon all over Jaffa on the lampposts and stuff. So if he was this horrible, why is his likeness everywhere? I have no idea. I actually have to ask someone. So death would continue in Yaffo when an epidemic of the bubonic plague attacked the city soon after Napoleon's departure. Now, after all these devastating events, a new Ottoman governor was appointed to Yaffo. His name was Muhammad Abu Nabut, and he organized a number of building and restoration projects to bring the city back together. But this was all set back in 1834 during the Peasant Revolt. And during this rebellion against the Ottoman Egyptian governor's conscription and taxation policies in the Ottoman Jerusalem district, Yaffo experienced 40 days of violent civil unrest. So basically what was happening is the Egyptian governor was placing demands for conscription and goods on the people of what was known in the Ottoman Empire as the Jerusalem district, which is now the area of Israel. A relative calm returned to Yaffo in the 19th century, and residents reestablished themselves in the city. And in 1820, Isaiah Ajiman of Istanbul built a synagogue and a hostel for Jews on their way to the holy cities in Jerusalem on their way to the holy cities of Jerusalem, Hebron, Tveria, and Tzvat. And this area became home to a thriving Jewish community in Yaffo that still exists to this day. In 1832, Yaffo saw more unrest at the hand of Ottoman power plays when the Ottoman governor of Egypt, Muhammad Ali, attempted to take the city by force and add it to the territorial ambitions of his own Egyptian empire. See, he was breaking away and wanted Yaffo for himself. By 1839, Yaffo was home to at least 153 Sephardi Jews led by over 50 years by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi Miragusa in the early 1850s. And Rabbi Halevi leased an orchard to an American woman named Clorinda S. Miner, and Miner was the founder of a Christian Messianic community called Mount Hope. That established a farming initiative to encourage local Jews to learn manual trades with the intention of bringing about the second coming of Jesus. So to her, I guess if Jews learned how to be plumbers and whatnot, then Jesus would come. I don't know how that works. It's a little confusing to me. If someone could put down in the comments why, I would love to know. I'm not disparaging it. I'm not being rude. It's an odd story. That's all. So the orchard changed hands in 1855 when Halevi sold the orchard to the British Jewish philanthropist Moses Montefiore, although Miner and her Messianic group continued to manage it. In 1867, Yaffo had a population of approximately 5,000 residents, with 3,200 of them being Muslim, 1,000 of them being Christian, and 800 of them Jews. During this time, Yaffo's city walls were torn down, and in the 1870s, the city expanded to embrace its growing population, which we're going to go into because Yaffo just balloons in size. So the population continued to grow as Yaffo entered the beginning of the 20th century. And because of this is so cool. A group of Jews purchased land on the sand dunes just to the north of the city. Are you following? Then in 1909, a lottery was held to divide the lots for a settlement that was first known as Ahuzat Bayit. Now, this name was changed by its residents on May 21st, 1910, to the more familiar, are you ready? Tel Aviv, ya habibi, Tel Aviv. So Tel Aviv came into existence out of Jewish residents from Yaffo. And we're going to do another episode after this on Tel Aviv. But how neat is that? Did you know that? I didn't know. I mean, I sort of knew something about it, but I think it's such a cool story. So at the time of the establishment of this new settlement, numerous other Jewish suburbs also came into existence, all making room for an influx of new Jewish immigrants to the Holy Land. Now, with them came Rabbi Avraham Isaac Kook, and I love that name, and he is one of the founding fathers of religious Zionism, and he assumed the role of chief rabbi of Yaffo. Then in 1917, it gets bad though, Ottoman authorities began a deportation of both Tel Aviv and Yaffo, which resulted in the Ottomans expelling the entire civilian population, everyone. Eventually, the Muslim evacuees of the cities and surrounding towns were allowed to return, but the Jewish evacuees from the area remained in camps, with even some of them having been deported to Egypt. They remained there until after the British campaign against the Ottoman Empire during World War I. Now, following this campaign, the British captured Yaffo in November of 1917, but it still remained under observation and fire from Ottoman forces until late December 1917. Then, riding a wave of successes led by the capture of Jerusalem on the 11th of December, the British pushed Ottoman forces back in the Battle of Jaffa, which secured the city and allowed the lines of communication between Yaffo and Jerusalem, to be reestablished. I'm going to have one more sip of coffee, and then we're going to talk about the British Mandate. So it is. It rides this just roller coaster of all this stuff happening. So after assuming control of the former Ottoman territories and establishing the British Mandate for Palestine, a census was conducted in 1922. And during the census, Yaffo was shown to have had a population of 47,799, consisting of 20,699 Muslims, 20,152 Jews, and 6,850 Christians. The population increased by the time of the 1931 census from 47,000 to 51,866. So remember I told you Yaffo was starting to boom. Now, during the British Mandate, tensions were aggravated between the Jewish and Arab populations of Yaffo, resulting in a wave of Arab attacks in both 1920 and 1921, which caused a number of Jewish residents to flee and resettle in Tel Aviv, which at the time was just a small Jewish neighborhood. The Yaffo riots of 1921 began with a May Day parade that devolved into violence as Arab rioters attacked Jewish residents and buildings, killing 47 Jews and wounding 146. It was during these riots that the celebrated Hebrew author Yosef Chaim Brenner was killed. He's one of my favorite authors. I need to do an episode on him. As a result of this, by the end of 1922, Tel Aviv had 15,000 residents, and by 1927, the population had risen to 38,000. So, as a direct correlation between these Yaffo riots, Tel Aviv grew. Now, despite this violence, during most of the 1920s, Yaffo and Tel Aviv maintained a peaceful yet wary coexistence. The city was also home to most of the Jewish businesses, and some of the surrounding Jewish neighborhoods were paying taxes to the municipality in Yaffo. Also located in Yaffo was the first electric company in Mandatory Palestine. How cool is that? Which was owned by Jewish shareholders and had been named the Yaffo Electric Company. Thus began in 1923 the rapid process for the creation of a joint grid that electrified both Yaffo and Tel Aviv. So in 1923, boom, we got power. This wary coexistence between the Jewish and Arab population in mandatory Palestine disintegrated with the eruption of the 1936 to 1939 Arab revolt and inflicted wide-scale damage to Yaffo's economy and its infrastructure. And it began on April 19th, 1936, with a riot that resulted in 9 Jews murdered, and with dozens more injured. Now, during the revolt, the Arab leadership declared a general strike, which largely started in the port of Yaffo, which for the Arab rioters had become a local point for Arab resistance. So the port of Yaffo was the focal point for Arab resistance. Now, the British, as a result, had military reinforcements brought in from both Malta and Egypt to subdue the rioting, which was now spreading throughout the country. And Yaffo's old city, with its maze of winding alleyways and its underground sewers, the underground sewer system provided an ideal escape route for the rioters fleeing the British Army as they tried to suppress the revolt. Now, in May 1936, in a bid to quash the Arab resistance, Yaffo's municipal services were cut off and the old city was barricaded by the British. All access roads into the city were covered with glass shards and nails. And in June, British bombers dropped boxes of leaflets in Arabic requesting the inhabitants to evacuate that same day. Then, on June 16th, British Royal Engineers blew up approximately 220 to 240 homes running from the east to the west. And this left an open strip that cut straight through the city from end to end. And as a result, 6,000 Arab residents of Yaffo were left homeless. Now, a British siege of the city took place on the evening of June 17th, 1936, with 1,500 British troops entering Yaffo, supported by a British warship that was sealing off any escape by sea. And on the 29th, British troops conducted demolition operations that destroyed numerous buildings and structures from the north of the city down to the south, down through to the south. And in the end, the British regained control of Yaffo. Well, they can regain control of what was left of Yaffo. They had destroyed everything else. Now, by 1945, Yaffo's population had returned, and it had swelled to 94,310, of whom 50,880 were Muslims, 28,000 were Jews, 15,400 were Christians, who were mostly Greek Orthodox, with approximately 1/6 of them members of the Eastern Catholic Church, and 30 of whom who were classified as other. I don't even know what that means, but wow. Nobody likes Yaffo. Nobody can just come to Yaffo and make it work. Everything is just, you know what I mean? Like crazy. Everyone's sacking it. Everyone's sieging it. Everyone's raising it. From all the way back to, you know, the Persians, all the way up until the British. So, all right, that's it. I finish off with the British Mandate, and that's this episode. Hey, I hope you liked this episode. If you liked it, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell. And if you want to take it with you, you can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and on Spotify. Listen, I would love for you to go over to Amazon and check out our flashcards. They are the best way to learn Hebrew or to brush up. We have a new set coming out. It is verbs. It's a big set, and it's taken a lot of work. It's a full conjugation of about, I think it's 100 verbs. So it's really worth it. It gives you its bang for its buck. So we also have a couple of other ones. We have the Aleph Bet in print and script, which you can get now. We also have numbers in Hebrew, and we have body and clothing, which also includes colors. You can find it on Amazon for Kindle, and as I said, if you don't have Kindle on your Android, iPhone, iPad, PC, or your Mac, you can download it below in the description. Also there, you'll find my children's book, Who is a Jew, that tells you, it's a bedtime story, and it tells your kids how awesome it is to be Jewish. So check that out as well. All right, hey, that is it. Toda rabah, lehitrod ve yalla bye.
רק זאת ביקשתי, בידה אחזתי, היא כמו חלום שלא נגמר. רק זאת שאלתי, שליבי נתתי, הושעתי לפרח הנשאר. רק זאת שאלתי, שליבי נתתי, הושעתי לפרח הנשאר. כמו ציפור נודדת, מחפשת מולדת, על ענף עץ בטוח, התיישבתי לנוח. שום דבר לא מוכר שם למטה, מרגישה עבודה בגבהים. נשימה ארוכה לקחתי ויצאתי מבין העלים.